Chapter 5, Activity-Based Costing. In this presentation, we'll be looking at what broad averaging does to undercost or overcost products and services. Then we'll look at some guidelines for refining a cost management system and distinguish between simple and activity-based costing systems. And we're going to wait on this one. Okay? This chapter is about activity-based costing. So what we do is we first look at what using like a predetermined overhead rate does, a single plant overhead rate does to cost, and then we'll look at what happens when we refine it more to the activities that are involved. Okay, and then finally we'll look at the cost benefits, how managers use activity-based systems and activity-based management, and then compare the systems to departmental costing. Now, when companies tend to produce only one or a limited number of products, a broad average can be an effective way to allocate costs. However, as the breadth of products offered increases and their use of resources becomes diverse, that system is no longer accurate. And the departmental method is a bit of an improvement, but it still uses a relatively broad average. So you can think that there's a trade-off between something that's simple versus something that's more realistic. And simplicity is nice because it's understandable and managers understand it easily. So that's the attraction to these, but they can be very inaccurate and then lead to poor decision making. Whereas the complex methods are harder to understand, but they're usually more accurate. Now recall the formula to calculate a plant-wide overhead rate uses total estimated overhead in the numerator, and the total estimated base that will be used is the denominator. And that might be direct labor hours, direct labor dollars, machine hours, or something else. And the result will be a dollar amount per single unit of the base. For example, if our total overhead estimate is $750,000 and our total estimated base is 15,000 direct labor hours, then we'll allocate $50 of overhead for each direct labor hour. Okay? Now a departmental rate works similarly, but would allocate the $750 overhead separately to each department. So in our example, we have two departments, A and B, with overhead costs of $300,000 and $450,000. And Department A uses direct labor hours as a base, while Department B uses machine hours. So here's our overhead. We've got overhead for A, there's $300,000 and $450,000, so there's our total plant-wide would be $750,000. Direct labor hours are $8,000, $7,000. Machine hours are $750 and $1,200. Okay, so in both cases here, we're used for the driver, we're using ones that are used, disproportionately by one department versus another. Okay, the allocation rate is $37.50 per direct labor hour for Department A, and for Department B, it would be, we're using 1,200 machine hours, so 450,000 divided by 1,200, that gives us $375 per machine hour. This type of broad averaging is no longer as accurate as companies need their costing to be. Okay, historically, firms produced a limited variety of goods, and at the same time, their indirect costs were relatively small. Well, now they're huge. Okay, so the short and long-term effect of this over or under costing can be really significant. It's probably obvious to you that if we're spreading out or allocating costs using broad averages, most certainly some products will be overcosted and others will be undercosted, right? Just because we're using an average. So the definitions here are merely the acknowledgement that some products will be allocated too much versus what they actually use, and others too little. Cross-subsidization causes problems for businesses. The greater the degree, the bigger the problems are likely to be. The manufacturing overhead costs that are allocated are included as part of a product cost. Therefore, they're included when we look at the profitability of a particular product. Some products will show higher profitability than they should, and others will look like duds when they may actually be contributing to a firm's profitability, and the results can be disastrous. So if you were using cost to determine price, what effect would that have? Your prices would be all off. And if you're looking at product profitability to determine marketing focus, what would be the results of that? And if managers use product costs every day to make decisions, so if the cost is wrong, so would the decision be. So let's look at an example. We've got this Department A has 300,000 of overhead, uses 8,000 direct labor hours to drive it. Department B has 450,000 and uses 1,200 machine hours. Job 457 incurs 1,000 direct labor hours in A and 1,000 in B, 50 machine hours in A and 70 machine hours in B. So here's our allocation of overhead. Department A would get 1,000 times 3,750, 37,500. Department B. Okay. For Department A, we've got 300,000 divided by the 8,000 direct labor hours, or 3,750 per direct labor hour. And the overhead in Department B would be 450 divided by 1,200, which gives us 375 per direct machine hour. And this is for this we're looking at a particular job here that used 1,000 direct labor hours and 75 machine hours, so this would be their overhead allocation. If we let's see, if we let's compare this now to the plant-wide rate. So if we use the departmental rates, I've got 37.5 plus 28,125, a total of 65,000 that was allocated. Okay, if we use the plant-wide rate based on direct labor hours, it would be 100,000. And if we used a plant-wide rate based on machine hours, it would be 48,000. Okay, so you've got these three crazy numbers and you're trying to use these numbers to make decisions, it would be a real problem. Okay. So this chart depicts the process involved in simple costing for our sample company. This Plastum, which is currently uses this costing system, and let's go through the steps. The first thing they would do is identify their cost objects, and right now they've got 60,000 S3 simple lenses, and then these are more complex lenses, I think, 15,000 of these S5 lenses. Okay, identify the direct costs. Okay, the direct costs would be direct materials and direct manufacturing labor. Then select the cost allocation base to use. Plastum has elected to use direct manufacturing labor hours as the base and estimates 39,750 direct labor hours as the allocation base. And then identify the indirect costs associated with each base. If you have only one base, you'll only need one cost pool for all the costs to be allocated. If you're using multiple bases, then you'll separate the cost pools to be allocated into separate pool for each base. Okay, this company only uses one allocation base, which means we're only going to have one pool. And the estimate of indirect costs is $2,385,000. So there's our cost pool right here. Okay, we decide that we're going to allocate it over direct manufacturing labor hours. So we've got 39,750 in our direct labor hours, which gives us $60 of an allocation, $60 per direct labor hour. Okay, so the way we would allocate that, we would have, let's get some numbers here. Here are our direct materials for the simple lenses versus the complex lenses. Okay, there is direct manufacturing labor. For the indirect costs, we would have 30,000 times $60 or $1,000,008. Okay, and for the complex lenses, we would have 9,750 times $60 or 585,000. So this would be our total cost using just a simple costing model. Okay, and I don't know if you remember in Chapter 1, but we talked about the 5-step decision-making process, and this Plastim's path is clear. They need to determine if they can profitably offer S3 to their customer at a lower price. So what they'll do is they'll obtain information on the current costing method and look at refined costing methods. Is there a more accurate way of allocating costs for their products that may change their pricing strategy? And remember, you're not searching for a costing method that will allow you to bid for the business. You're looking for an improved costing method which may or may not have that result. Okay? And there are 3 principal reasons that have accelerated the demand for costing systems. There's been an increase in product diversity. So let's say the computer and network resources needed to support electronic banking products are much greater than the computer and network resources needed to support a passbook savings account. You guys probably don't even remember those, but it was kind of a neat thing that you'd have a little book that you got from the bank that had your savings accounts detailed in there. So you'd have a balance, and every time you made a deposit, there'd be an entry in the book, and then you keep the book in your top drawer, and it was kind of a nice thing for your hands. An increase in indirect costs with different cost drivers. Let's see, the use of product and process technology, all right, such as computer integrated manufacturing and flexible manufacturing systems, has led to a tremendous increase in indirect costs and also a decrease in direct costs. And finally, competition in product markets. Making correct decisions about pricing and product mix is critical in competitive markets. So these factors explain why managers want to refine cost systems. Refining cost systems requires gathering, validating, analyzing, and storing vast quantities of data. So there are 3 main guidelines for refining a cost system. The first thing you want to do is identify as many direct costs as possible. All right, if you can economically trace it and it's a nice direct cost, you want to identify that one. You want to expand the number of indirect cost pools until each pool is more homogeneous. Okay, all costs in a homogeneous cost pool have the same or similar cause and effect relationship with a single cost driver. Okay, and then finally, for your cost allocation basis, whenever possible, you want to use the cost driver as the cost allocation base for each homogeneous indirect cost pool. Not always possible, but you want to try. Okay. And this is where we'll pick up on cost hierarchies in the next presentation, and we'll do some ABC costing.